The administrator's voice on the phone was apologetic but firm. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Thompson, but we have strict instructions from your daughter-in-law that you're not permitted in the maternity ward." I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. "There must be some mistake," I insisted. "My son Michael is having his first child. I need to be there." "I understand this is difficult," the administrator continued, "but Mrs. Thompson, the younger Mrs. Thompson, was quite clear. Only her parents and her husband are allowed during the delivery and first visitation period." A wave of disbelief washed over me. After everything I'd done for Michael and Rebecca over the years, I was being shut out of one of the most important moments in our family's history. What made it even more painful was that less than 2 years ago, I had donated $2.5 million to Riverside Memorial's new neonatal intensive care wing, the very unit where my grandchild might be born. Rebecca had known about that donation. She'd stood beside me at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, smiling for the cameras, her arm linked with mine as if we were the closest of family. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I'd raised Michael alone since he was 8 years old, after his father died suddenly of a heart attack. Mark had left us with some life insurance, but not nearly enough to maintain our middle-class lifestyle in Oakridge, the suburb we called home. I took on extra shifts at the hospital where I worked as a nurse, eventually working my way up to nursing supervisor over the course of 20 years. Every decision I made was with Michael in mind, staying in Oakridge so he wouldn't have to change schools, working nights so I could attend his daytime soccer games and school events, putting aside a portion of each paycheck for his college fund, even when it meant postponing home repairs or driving the same car for 15 years. When Michael earned a scholarship to State University, I felt like all our sacrifices had paid off. He was the first in our family to attend college, and I couldn't have been prouder. It was during his junior year that he met Rebecca Wilson, a business major from Westlake, the affluent town neighboring Oakridge. Rebecca came from money, old money, the kind that came with vacation homes and country club memberships. Her father, Edward Wilson, owned a chain of luxury car dealerships across the state, and her mother, Catherine, was active in the kind of charity circles that required designer gowns and 5-figure donations just to attend the events. The first time Michael brought Rebecca home, I noticed how her eyes swept over our modest 3-bedroom ranch house, taking in the worn furniture and outdated kitchen with poorly concealed judgment. Still, she was polite, and Michael was clearly smitten. Who was I to stand in the way of my son's happiness? "Mom makes the best pot roast in the county," Michael had boasted as we sat down to dinner. "It's lovely," Rebecca said after taking a small bite. "Though at home, we usually have our chef prepare something lighter for dinner. Red meat several times a week can raise your cholesterol significantly." "Well, we don't have a chef," I'd laughed, trying to keep things light. "Just me and my grandmother's recipes." "You should come to dinner at my parents' place sometime," Rebecca offered. "They're chef trained in Paris. It's a completely different experience." Over the following year, Michael began spending more time with Rebecca's family. Weekend visits. Home became less frequent, and when he did visit, our conversations were increasingly dominated by stories about the Wilsons, their connections, their travels, their lifestyle. "Mr. Wilson has offered to help me get an interview at Lancaster. Financial after graduation," Michael told me during one visit. "It's one of the top investment firms in the region." "That's wonderful," I said, though I couldn't help feeling a twinge of concern. Michael had always talked about teaching economics, inspired by his favorite high school teacher. "But what about your plans to get a teaching certificate?" Michael shifted uncomfortably. "Rebecca thinks teaching wouldn't really use my full potential. And the salary difference is substantial, Mom. Lancaster starts their junior analysts at 6 figures. I nodded, reminding myself that Michael was an adult making his own choices. As long as it's what you want, I said carefully. Of course it is, he replied, though he didn't quite meet my eyes. The engagement came shortly after graduation. The ring was enormous, a family heirloom from Rebecca's maternal grandmother, reset with additional diamonds. The wedding planning began immediately, with Catherine Wilson taking charge of every detail. Mrs. Thompson, Catherine said during one of the early planning meetings at their sprawling Westlake estate, we've reserved the Lakeside Club for the reception. The waiting list is usually 2 years, but the club president is a dear friend. That sounds lovely, I replied. I've been saving for Michael's wedding since he was small. I can contribute $15,000 toward the expenses. Catherine's smile didn't reach her eyes. That's thoughtful. But Edward and I have it covered. The Wilson family has held all major events at the Lakeside Club for generations. My contribution was politely declined, my input on the planning gently but firmly dismissed. I told myself it didn't matter, that the important thing was Michael's happiness. The wedding was a lavish affair with over 300 guests, most of whom I'd never met. I found myself seated at a table far from the main wedding party, alongside distant Wilson relatives who barely acknowledged my presence. During his toast, Edward Wilson spoke at length about welcoming Michael into their family, with no mention of the family Michael came from. After the wedding, Michael and Rebecca purchased a home in Westlake, just 3 streets away from her parents. My suggestions about houses in between our neighborhoods, which would have been more affordable and given them some independence, were dismissed. Mom, you don't understand real estate as an investment, Michael explained, with a patience that bordered on condescension. Edward says location is everything, and the Westlake School District is essential for when we have children. Children. The thought gave me hope. Surely when grandchildren came, my role in Michael's life would find new meaning. When Rebecca announced her pregnancy a year later, I was overjoyed. I immediately began gathering the baby items I'd saved from Michael's infancy. Handmade blankets, the wooden cradle my late husband had crafted, books with my son's tiny handprints pressed inside the covers. These are wonderful keepsakes, I told Michael one Sunday afternoon, boxes spread across my living room. I've been saving them all these years. He looked uncomfortable. That's really sweet, Mom, but Rebecca's already finished the nursery. Her designer did this whole Scandinavian minimalist theme. I'm not sure these would fit. Oh, I said, trying to hide my disappointment. Well, maybe just the cradle. Your father made it. Rebecca found this really high-tech bassinet that monitors the baby's breathing and sleep patterns. It connects to our phones. He shrugged apologetically. Safety features have come a long way. I repacked the boxes silently, telling myself that things would change once the baby arrived. Rebecca would need help, advice, support. Things I was well positioned to provide as both a mother and a medical professional. As Rebecca's due date approached, I requested time off from the hospital. After 35 years in nursing, including the last 15 as a supervisor in the maternity ward of Riverside Memorial, I had accumulated significant vacation time. I planned to be there for the birth and the crucial first weeks afterward. That's not necessary, Rebecca said when I mentioned my plans during a family dinner at their house. My mother is taking a month off to stay with us, and we've hired a night nurse recommended by Dr. Winters. I have experience with newborns too, I said, trying to keep my voice light, both personally and professionally. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Hospital nursing is different from private care, Catherine interjected. Our night nurse worked for the Halversons, the senator's family, for all 3 of their children. The conversation moved on, but the message was clear. My experience, both as a mother and as a medical professional, was considered outdated or insufficient compared to what the Wilsons could provide. The final blow came 2 days before Rebecca's scheduled induction. Michael called, his voice tight with tension. "Mom, there's something we need to discuss about the birth." I held my breath, somehow knowing what was coming. "Rebecca feels strongly that just having her parents and me in the hospital would be less stressful. So we're asking that you wait until we're home to visit the baby." "Michael," I said carefully, "I'm not just any visitor. I'm your mother, the baby's grandmother." "I know, Mom, but Rebecca's having a hard time right now. Her blood pressure's been elevated, and Dr. Winters says minimizing stress is critical." "And I'm a source of stress?" I asked, my voice catching. "It's not like that," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "It's just for the first few days. We'll call you as soon as we're settled at home." I hung up the phone, a numbness spreading through me. After a lifetime of putting Michael first, after decades of service to the very hospital where my grandchild would be born, after a $5 million donation to ensure that babies like mine would receive the best possible care, I was being treated as an unwelcome outsider. That evening, alone in my house filled with unwanted baby keepsakes, I came to a painful realization. My unquestioning support, my financial contributions, my silent acceptance of being sidelined, none of it had earned me respect from Rebecca or the Wilsons. Instead, it had taught them that I could be dismissed without consequences. For the first time in our relationship, I decided not to simply accept Michael and Rebecca's terms. If I was being banned from Riverside Memorial, the hospital where I'd spent my career, the hospital that displayed my name on a donor plaque in the lobby, then it was time the administration understood exactly who they were turning away. The next morning, I called Philip Barnes, the chairman of Riverside Memorial's board of directors. Phil and I had worked together for over 2 decades. He had been the one to approach me about the neonatal unit donation after I received a modest inheritance from my childless aunt, the only wealthy member of our family. "Joan, what can I do for you?" Phil asked warmly. "I seem to have a problem, Phil," I said, keeping my voice steady. "My daughter-in-law is having her baby at Riverside tomorrow, and I've been informed that I'm not permitted in the maternity ward." There was a pause. "That doesn't sound right. Let me look into this." "There's something else you should know," I continued. "The neonatal unit that bears my family name? That's where my grandchild might end up if there are any complications. And I've been banned from entering it." "Joan?" Phil's voice had changed, becoming more formal. "I had no idea this concerned your family. There must be some misunderstanding. Let me make some calls." "I'd appreciate that," I said, "because I'm trying to understand why the hospital's second largest individual donor would be prohibited from visiting her own grandchild in a wing she helped build." After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen, hands shaking slightly. In all my years as a mother, I had never leveraged power or connections to get my way. I had taught Michael that merit and hard work were what mattered, not who you knew or how much money you had. But now, faced with the prospect of missing my grandchild's birth because of Rebecca's arbitrary decision, I had done exactly what the Wilsons would have done, called someone with authority and reminded them of my importance. The realization left me conflicted, but I couldn't deny the sense of empowerment that came with finally standing up for myself. Less than an hour later, my phone rang. It was Michael. "Mom, what did you do?" His voice was a mixture of anger and disbelief. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I knew exactly what had happened. "The hospital administrator just called Rebecca, asking if there had been some mistake about family visitation policies. She mentioned something about the Thompson neonatal unit and board interventions. Rebecca is furious. I simply made a call, Michael, just like Edward Wilson would have done if someone had tried to keep him from seeing his grandchild." "That's different," Michael protested. "How?" "Because when the Wilsons throw their weight around, it's normal. But when I do it, it's inappropriate." "I've spent my life playing by different rules, Michael. Being humble, never asking for special treatment, teaching you that character matters. more than connections. And where has it gotten me? Banned from my grandchild's birth by people who see me as irrelevant. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Mom?" Michael finally said, his voice quieter. "I didn't realize how this looked from your perspective." "How could you? You've been seeing everything through the Wilsons' lens for years now." I took a deep breath. "I don't expect to change Rebecca's mind. But I want you to understand something. I will not be marginalized in my grandchild's life. I won't force my way into the delivery room if I'm not wanted, but I also won't pretend that this treatment is acceptable." After we hung up, I felt both drained and oddly liberated. For years, I had silently accepted my diminishing role in Michael's life, believing that my self-sacrifice was proof of my love. But in that moment, I realized that true love, for both Michael and myself, required honesty and self-respect. The next day, I was sitting in my garden when a car pulled into my driveway. To my surprise, Michael stepped out alone. "Mom," he said as he approached, looking tired and conflicted, "we need to talk." I gestured to the chair beside me. "I'm listening." "Rebecca went into labor last night," he began. "Early, before the scheduled induction. Everything happened so fast." My heart sank. "The baby? Is everything all right?" "She's perfect," he said, a smile briefly crossing his face. 7 pounds, 2 ounces. We named her Emma. "Congratulations," I said softly. "Emma was your grandmother's name." "I know," he nodded. "I remembered you telling me stories about her, how strong she was, raising 3 kids on her own during the Depression." I felt tears threatening. Michael had been listening all those years ago when I shared our family history, stories the Wilsons would have found unimpressive. "There's something else," Michael continued. "Emma was premature. Not dangerously so, but enough that they wanted to monitor her in the neonatal unit for a few hours." "The Thompson neonatal unit," I said quietly. "Yes." He looked at his hands. "They took me on a tour while they were checking her, showed me all the equipment. The nurse kept pointing out how everything was state-of-the-art. She said it was thanks to a major donation a couple of years ago." I remained silent, letting him continue. "I saw the plaque, Mom, with your name on it. I knew you'd made a donation, but I had no idea it was that significant. The nurse said the equipment probably exists in only a handful of hospitals in the state." "It was my aunt's money," I said. "I wanted it to go somewhere meaningful." "But you could have spent it on yourself, after all those years of sacrifice." He shook his head. "Instead, you gave it to help other people's babies. And then Rebecca and I tried to keep you away from your own grandchild in the very unit you helped create." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. "Where is Rebecca now?" I asked. "At the hospital with her parents. She's processing everything." He hesitated. "I told her I needed to see you, to tell you about Emma in person. She didn't like it, but right now, I don't care." This small act of defiance surprised me. Michael had been so careful to avoid contradicting Rebecca for years. "I've been thinking about everything you said yesterday," he continued, "about how I've been seeing things through the Wilsons' lens. You're right. Somewhere along the way, I started believing that their way of doing things, their values, were superior to how I was raised. The Wilsons have a lot to offer," I acknowledged. "Success, connections, security. It's natural you'd be drawn to that." "But at what cost?" he asked. I look at my daughter, and I think about the kind of person I want her to become. Do I want her to value status and appearances over genuine relationships? To judge people based on their income or address? He shook his head. "That's not what you taught me." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of years of unspoken tensions between us. "I want you to come to the hospital," Michael finally said. "Not because the board intervened or because your name is on a plaque, but because you're Emma's grandmother. Because you're my mother." "What about Rebecca?" I asked cautiously. "She's not happy," he admitted. "But I've made it clear this isn't negotiable. You get to meet your granddaughter today." I felt a complex mix of emotions: joy at the prospect of meeting Emma, gratitude for Michael's stand, and apprehension about the conflict ahead. "This won't be easy," I warned. "Rebecca and her parents won't change overnight." "I know," Michael nodded. "But something has to change. What happened? Trying to keep you away. It was wrong. I see that now." As we drove to the hospital, I reflected on how it had taken this extreme situation, being banned and then having to assert my position, to break the pattern we'd established. For years, I had silently accepted being marginalized, believing that objecting would only push Michael further away. But my silence had only enabled the problem to grow. At the hospital, Rebecca's cool reception made it clear that this was just the beginning of a long road toward establishing a healthier family dynamic. Catherine Wilson barely acknowledged my presence, and Edward made a point of mentioning how their country club connections had secured Rebecca the hospital's best suite. But none of that mattered the moment I held Emma in my arms. Looking into her tiny face, with Michael's chin and my mother's eyes, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about my relationship with Michael and Rebecca. It was about ensuring that Emma grew up knowing both sides of her heritage. In the weeks following Emma's birth, I treaded carefully, conscious of the fragile truce that Michael had established. Rebecca allowed me to visit twice a week, always with prior notice, always with specific arrival and departure times clearly communicated. It wasn't the open-door relationship I'd dreamed of having with my first grandchild, but it was a start, a foothold I was determined to maintain. The Wilson grandparents, meanwhile, had unlimited access. Catherine often stayed overnight, positioning herself as an indispensable assistant to the night nurse they'd hired. Edward made daily visits after work, bringing expensive toys and baby clothes from boutiques I couldn't afford to shop at. The narrative was clear. They were the primary grandparents, and I was supplementary, tolerated rather than embraced. During one visit, I arrived to find Catherine reorganizing Emma's dresser, meticulously folding tiny designer outfits. "Oh, Joan, you're early," she said, glancing at her watch with disapproval. "We said 2 o'clock. "It's 2 now," I replied, checking my own watch. "I'm right on time." "Well, Rebecca is resting. The night was difficult. Emma's been fussy with colic," she continued, her tone suggesting this information was classified, shared reluctantly with someone who wasn't fully entitled to it. "I treated dozens of colicky babies during my nursing career," I offered. "Have you tried the football hold with gentle pressure on her tummy? It often helps." Catherine's expression tightened. The night nurse has been using a specialized hold recommended by Dr. Winters. It's a more modern approach. I bit my tongue, reminding myself that this wasn't about being right. It was about maintaining access to Emma. So I nodded and moved to the nursery, where my granddaughter lay in her bassinet, tiny fists waving in the air. "Hello, sweet girl," I whispered, gently lifting her. She fussed momentarily, then settled against my shoulder, instinctively recognizing the football hold I'd slipped into without thinking. Catherine watched from the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Rebecca mentioned you'll be starting back at the hospital next week," she said after a moment. "Full-time, is it?" "Yes," I confirmed. "My leave is ending, but I've arranged my schedule to keep Tuesdays and Fridays free for Emma." "Visits. You're fortunate to have that flexibility," Catherine remarked, "though it must be challenging at your age to keep up with hospital shifts." I was 58, hardly ancient, especially in a profession where experience was valued. But I'd learned to recognize these subtle digs for what they were, attempts to reinforce the hierarchy, to remind me of my place in their social order. "I find my experience helps me work more efficiently," I replied evenly. And I enjoy mentoring younger nurses. Emma began to fuss again, her little face reddening with effort. Recognizing the signs, I adjusted her position slightly and patted her back. A moment later, she released an impressive burp, followed by a look of such comical surprise that I couldn't help laughing. "There we go," I murmured. "Better out than in, right, Emma Bear?" Catherine stepped forward, hands outstretched. "I should take her. Rebecca prefers that we use a specific burping technique. The night nurse is concerned about developing bad habits." I hesitated, then reluctantly handed Emma over. "Of course." As Catherine took her, Emma immediately began crying, the indignant wail of a baby whose comfort has been disrupted. Catherine bounced her awkwardly, trying to position her as the night nurse had apparently demonstrated. "She seems to prefer the way you were holding her," Rebecca's voice came from the doorway. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, a stark contrast to her usually polished appearance. "I was just explaining that we need to be consistent with the techniques the night nurse showed us," Catherine said quickly. Rebecca rubbed her temples. "Mom, right now I just need her to stop crying. I've had 3 hours of sleep in the last 2 days." I stayed silent, watching the interaction. After a moment's hesitation, Catherine handed Emma back to me. The baby immediately began to settle, her cries reducing to hiccuping sobs, then quieting altogether as I resumed the gentle pressure on her tummy. "How are you doing that?" Rebecca asked, moving closer to watch. "It's an old nursing trick," I explained, keeping my voice neutral. "The pressure helps with the gas pain, and the slight motion is soothing." Rebecca studied my technique, then tentatively reached for Emma. "Could you show me?" This simple request, the first time she'd asked for my help, felt monumental. I carefully transferred Emma to her mother's arms, guiding Rebecca's hands into the right position. "Like this," I demonstrated. Firm but gentle pressure and a slight rocking motion. Rebecca mimicked my actions, and Emma remained calm in her arms. The look of relief on my daughter-in-law's face was profound. "Thank you," she said quietly. It wasn't an apology for excluding me, nor a sudden embrace of my role as grandmother, but it was an acknowledgement. Small, but significant. Catherine observed this exchange with thinly veiled disapproval. "I'm sure Dr. Winters would have suggestions at your next appointment," she interjected. "More modern approaches based on recent pediatric research." "Maybe," Rebecca conceded. "But this is working right now, and I really need something that works." It was a tiny victory, but I savored it. Not because I'd momentarily outshone Catherine, but because for the first time, Rebecca had seen value in what I could offer. Not as competition, but as a resource. A first crack in the wall of exclusion. When my visit ended, Rebecca walked me to the door instead of having Catherine see me out, as had become the routine. "The night nurse doesn't come on Tuesdays," she said hesitantly. "If you wanted to come a little earlier next week, maybe you could show me more of those holding techniques." "I'd like that," I replied, careful not to appear too eager. "Any time that works for you." "Around noon? Michael will be at work, but—" She trailed off, the implication clear. Michael wouldn't be there to buffer the interaction between us. "Noon is perfect," I assured her. As I drove home, I reflected on this small opening. It wasn't friendship or acceptance, but it was a recognition of mutual purpose, Emma's well-being. And perhaps that was the best foundation to build upon. The following Tuesday, I arrived at noon exactly, a bag of fresh bagels and cream cheese in hand, a peace offering disguised as a practical lunch for a busy new mother. When Rebecca opened the door, the house was quiet. No sign of Catherine or the usual bustle of Wilson-approved baby specialists. "Mom's at her charity luncheon," Rebecca explained, leading me to the kitchen. Her tone suggested both relief and mild anxiety at being alone with me. And Emma finally fell asleep about 20 minutes ago. Perfect timing for you to eat something, I said, setting down the bagels. New mothers need to remember to feed themselves too. Rebecca nodded, suddenly looking very young and uncertain. A stark contrast to the polished, confident woman who had once surveyed my modest home with barely concealed judgment. Motherhood had humbled her in ways that wealth and privilege couldn't shield her from. I haven't been sleeping, she admitted, selecting a bagel. The night nurse only comes 3 nights a week, and on the other nights. She shook her head. Emma just cries and cries. Nothing I do seems right. Every baby is different, I said, careful to keep my tone non-judgmental. What works for one might not work for another. It's all about discovering what Emma needs, not what some expert says should work. That's not what Mom says. She keeps telling me I need to follow Dr. Winters' schedule exactly. That consistency is key. Rebecca picked at her bagel. But the schedule isn't working, and when I mention that to Mom, she just says I'm not implementing it correctly. I recognized the opportunity for what it was. Not a chance to criticize Catherine, but to offer Rebecca something she desperately needed: permission to trust her own instincts. You know, I said casually, when Michael was a baby, I read every book I could find. I was determined to do everything right. But he hadn't read those books. I smiled at the memory. He had his own ideas about when he should sleep and how he wanted to be held. Eventually, I realized that responding to him, to who he actually was, not who the book said he should be, was the most effective approach. Rebecca considered this, a thoughtful expression replacing her anxiety. Mom keeps saying that if I give in to Emma's cries, I'll spoil her, that I need to teach her to self-soothe from the beginning. There's a difference between spoiling and responding to legitimate needs, I said gently. Babies cry because it's their only way to communicate. Emma isn't manipulating you, she's telling you something. As if on cue, a cry came through the baby monitor. Rebecca tensed immediately, her barely touched bagel forgotten. Do you mind if I finish eating while you check on her? I asked. I'm starving, and you can call if you need me. This deliberate step back, giving Rebecca space to try first, rather than rushing in with my expertise, was calculated. She needed to build confidence in her own abilities, not just substitute my authority for Catherine's. Sure, she agreed, heading upstairs. Through the monitor, I could hear her gentle murmurs as she entered the nursery. Emma's cries intensified briefly, then began to quiet. I smiled to myself, resisting the urge to go up and observe. This was Rebecca's moment with her daughter, and my role was to support, not supervise. 10 minutes later, she returned, looking simultaneously tired and triumphant. She needed a diaper change and then settled right back down, she reported. I used that football hold you showed me. You're a natural, I said sincerely. Rebecca sank back into her chair, resuming her lunch with more appetite. I don't feel like a natural. Everyone else seems so sure about everything. Mom, the night nurse, Dr. Winters. I feel like I'm the only one who doesn't instinctively know what to do. Can I tell you a secret? I leaned forward conspiratorially. None of us know what we're doing at first. Not me, not your mother, not the most experienced pediatrician with their first child. We all just figure it out as we go along. Rebecca looked skeptical. Mom never talks like that. She always acts like she knew exactly what to do from day one. Maybe that's how she remembers it now, I suggested. Time has a way of smoothing over the rough patches in our memories. A thoughtful silence fell between us. For perhaps the first time, we were having a real conversation, not just polite exchanges or tense negotiations about my place in Emma's life, but an authentic sharing of experience. Michael said you raised him alone, Rebecca finally said, after his father died. Yes, I confirmed. From the time he was 8. That must have been incredibly difficult. I considered my response carefully. This wasn't the moment to detail every sacrifice, every long night spent working while Michael slept at a neighbor's house, every Christmas when I'd had to choose between paying the heating bill and buying the presents he wanted. It was challenging, I acknowledged, but also rewarding. Michael and I became a team. We figured things out together. He talks about you differently now, Rebecca said, surprising me. Since Emma was born. Since what happened at the hospital. I waited, giving her space to continue if she chose to. He told me about the donation, she added. The full amount. I knew you'd contributed, but I had no idea. She trailed off, looking uncomfortable. I thought it was more of a symbolic gesture. It was my aunt's inheritance, I explained, not wanting her to think I'd been hiding wealth all along. The only windfall our family ever received, I wanted it to make a real difference. It did, Rebecca said quietly. When Emma was in the NICU, even just for monitoring, seeing all that equipment, knowing it was there if she needed it. I can't explain what that meant. I nodded, understanding the terror of a new parent faced with even minor complications. I'm sorry, she said suddenly, the words coming out in a rush. About the hospital, asking Michael to tell you not to come. I was. It wasn't really about you. It was the closest thing to an apology I was likely to get, and I recognized it for the significant step it represented. What was it about? I asked gently, genuinely curious. Rebecca looked down at her hands. Control, I guess. Everything was happening so fast. The pregnancy, the preparations. Everyone had opinions. Mom, Dad, the doctors. You were the only one I could actually exclude. She glanced up, eyes shining with unshed tears. That sounds terrible, saying it out loud. It sounds human, I corrected. Frightened and overwhelmed and looking for some way to feel in control. She wiped at her eyes. Still, it was wrong. And then when the hospital called, saying there was confusion about visitor restrictions, mentioning your name on the neonatal unit. She shook her head. I felt so exposed, so humiliated, like everyone would know what I'd done. I considered my next words carefully. This fragile connection could easily shatter if I responded with righteous indignation or smug satisfaction, but neither could I simply dismiss what had happened, pretending it hadn't deeply hurt me. I won't say it didn't hurt, I acknowledged. It did, deeply. But I understand feeling overwhelmed and making decisions from a place of fear rather than clarity. Mom was so angry when she found out about your call to the board, Rebecca continued. She said you were trying to use your influence to override my wishes, that it was inappropriate and manipulative. And what did you think? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Rebecca hesitated. At first I agreed with her. I was angry too. But then, after Emma was born, after seeing the unit with your name on it, she sighed. I realized that if our positions had been reversed, if someone had tried to keep my mother from being there, she would have done exactly the same thing. Probably with a lot more drama and a team of lawyers. I couldn't help the small laugh that escaped me. Probably. A faint smile touched Rebecca's lips. Mom doesn't like when anyone challenges her authority, especially when it comes to family matters. I've noticed, I said dryly. She means, well, Rebecca offered, a reflexive defense of her mother that I recognized from Michael's similar defenses of me over the years. She has very strong ideas about how things should be done. Most mothers do, I conceded, including me. Rebecca studied me thoughtfully. But you backed off. With Michael. You let him make his own choices, even when you didn't agree with them. I tried to, I said. Not always successfully. But I still believe, that he needed to find his own path. My job was to provide roots and wings. That's not how my parents see it, Rebecca said, a new understanding in her voice. For them, success means following their blueprint. Exactly. I chose my next words with care, wary of seeming to criticize her parents directly. Different families have different values and approaches. There's no one right way to be a parent. Except Mom thinks there is, Rebecca said with unexpected frankness. Her way. The baby monitor lit up with Emma's cries again, cutting off our conversation. This time, Rebecca didn't tense up or look panicked. "Would you like to come up?" "With me?" she asked, rising from her chair. "I think she might be hungry, but maybe you could show me that other hold you mentioned, for after feeding?" "I'd like that," I said, following her upstairs. In the nursery, Emma's cries subsided as soon as Rebecca picked her up. My granddaughter blinked up at her mother with complete trust, tiny hands reaching toward her face. "She knows you," I observed. "She recognizes her mother." Rebecca's expression softened with wonder. "Do you really think so? The night nurse says babies this young can't recognize faces yet." "Maybe not visually, with perfect clarity," I acknowledged. "But they know their mother's scent, her voice, the feel of her arms. Emma knows who you are. Trust that connection." As Rebecca settled into the rocking chair to feed Emma, I stood back, giving them space for this intimate moment. The tension that had defined our previous interactions was noticeably absent, replaced by a tentative alliance. Not friendship yet, certainly not the warm mother-in-law, daughter-in-law relationship I'd once hoped for, but something with potential to grow. "Joan," Rebecca said, using my first name for perhaps the first time, "I was thinking, maybe you could come over on Thursday too this week. The night nurse won't be here Wednesday night, and I could probably use some help on Thursday morning." It was an olive branch, small but significant. "I'd be happy to," I replied simply. When Michael called that evening to check how the visit had gone, I was careful not to overstate the breakthrough. "It was nice," I said. "Emma's doing well, and Rebecca and I had a good talk." "Really?" The surprise in his voice was evident. "About what?" "Just baby things," I replied, not wanting to betray Rebecca's confidences. "Motherhood. She's finding her way." "She seemed different when I got home," Michael observed. "More relaxed. She even said she's thinking of asking the night nurse to come just 2 nights a week instead of 3. I smiled to myself. A small step toward independence from the army of experts and helpers the Wilsons had insisted were essential. "Rebecca mentioned you might come on Thursday as well as your usual days," he continued, a note of cautious optimism in his voice. "If that works for everyone," I confirmed. "It more than works, Mom. It's good. Really good." His voice softened. "I want Emma to know you, not just as an occasional visitor, but as her grandmother, as the amazing person who raised me." His words warmed me, but I kept my response measured. This new equilibrium was fragile, and I knew better than to take it for granted. "One day at a time," I said. "We're finding our way forward." Thursdays. Visit brought another small step in our evolving relationship. Rebecca had clearly been up much of the night. The dark circles under her eyes told the story, but she greeted me with genuine relief, rather than the reluctant politeness of previous visits. "Emma was up every hour," she explained, leading me to the living room where my granddaughter was finally sleeping in her portable bassinet. The technique worked to get her back down each time, but then she'd wake again almost immediately. "May I look at her?" I asked, mindful of boundaries. "Of course," Rebecca nodded, rubbing her temples. "I trust you, Joan. You've done this before." Those 4 words, "I trust you, Joan," represented a monumental shift. I gently lifted Emma, checking her diaper, feeling her forehead, observing the slight congestion in her breathing. "I think she might have a bit of a cold," I said. "Nothing serious, but enough to make her uncomfortable." Rebecca's face creased with worry. "Should we call Dr. Winters?" "We could," I acknowledged, "but he'll probably just suggest a humidifier, maybe some saline drops for her nose. We can do that now and see if it helps before calling. Unless you'd prefer to speak with him first?" Rebecca considered this, then shook her head. "No, let's try your suggestions. The last time I called for something minor, he was rather dismissive." I nodded, keeping my opinions about Dr. Winters, Catherine's hand-picked pediatrician, who seemed to view parents as impediments to his medical expertise rather than partners, to myself. "I think I have some infant saline drops in my purse," I offered. "I picked them up when I saw signs of congestion on Tuesday, just in case." "You noticed that 2 days ago?" Rebecca looked surprised. "Just a slight change in her breathing pattern," I explained. "Nothing concerning, but when you've been around babies as long as I have, you pick up on the subtle signs." Rebecca studied me with new respect. "I didn't even notice until she wouldn't sleep last night." "You're learning," I assured her. "Every day you're getting to know Emma better." I showed her how to administer the drops, how to position Emma to help drain her congestion, how to create a makeshift humidifier with a steaming bathroom since they didn't have a proper one. "Why don't you try to get some sleep while she's down?" I suggested afterward. "I'll watch her." Rebecca hesitated, maternal protectiveness warring with desperate exhaustion. "Really, it's fine," I promised. "I supervised the maternity ward for 15 years. I think I can handle one slightly snuffly baby for a few hours." "You're sure you don't mind?" "Not at all. It's what grandmothers are for." She nodded gratefully and headed upstairs, leaving me alone with Emma for the first time since her birth. I settled on the sofa beside her bassinet, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest, marveling at the perfect miniature fingers, the delicate curve of her ear, the way her expressions changed even in sleep. A small frown, a hint of a smile, a flickering of eyelids as she dreamed her newborn dreams. "Hello, sweet Emma," I whispered. "I'm your gran. I've been waiting so long to meet you properly." Her tiny hand curled reflexively around my finger when I touched her palm, the instinctive grasp of a newborn that never failed to move me, no matter how many babies I'd cared for professionally. "We had a rough start, you and I continued softly. "But that's behind us now. I'm going to be here for you, always. I promise." It was a pledge I intended to keep, not just to Emma, but to myself. To be present, to be patient, to build a relationship based on genuine connection, rather than obligation or righteousness. The path forward wouldn't be perfectly smooth. Catherine Wilson's influence remained strong, and old patterns wouldn't disappear overnight. But in that peaceful moment, with my granddaughter sleeping trustingly beside me, I felt a quiet confidence that we had turned a corner. 3 hours later, Rebecca came downstairs looking markedly more rested. She found me in the kitchen, Emma content in my arms as I gently rocked her while preparing a simple soup for lunch. "You didn't have to cook," Rebecca said, though the appreciation in her voice was evident. "Just a basic vegetable soup," I replied. "Easy to reheat, good for milk production, and you need proper nourishment." Rebecca moved closer, peering at Emma. "She looks better, more comfortable." "The drops helped," I confirmed. "And she's been sleeping peacefully for the last hour. The congestion seems to be easing." "Thank you," Rebecca said, the words carrying weight beyond this small intervention. "For knowing what to do, for being here." "You're welcome," I replied simply. As we sat down to lunch, Emma still nestled in my arms, the doorbell rang. Rebecca tensed visibly. "That's probably Mom," she said. "She mentioned she might stop by after her hair appointment." I nodded, preparing myself for Catherine's arrival and the shift in dynamics it would inevitably bring. But when Rebecca returned, From answering the door, she was alone, her expression troubled. "Everything okay?" I asked. "It was a delivery," she explained, setting a large gift basket on the counter. "From Mom. She can't come today after all. Some emergency with the charity gala she's organizing." She hesitated. "But she sent a professional humidifier, saline drops, vapor bath additives, and a note saying Dr. Winters recommends all of these for congestion." I carefully kept my expression neutral. That was thoughtful of her. Rebecca studied the basket, then looked back at me. "But you already knew what to do. You already had drops. You already showed me how to help Emma without all this." She gestured at the elaborate arrangement with its professionally printed card and monogrammed baby items. "Your mother wants to help," I said diplomatically. "She's showing her love the way she knows how." Rebecca sat back down, her gaze moving between the expensive gift basket and the simple soup I'd made. "Two very different approaches," she observed. "Both coming from a place of love," I reminded her, not wanting to encourage division between Rebecca and her mother, despite the temptation. She considered this, then nodded. "Yes, but one feels like help, and the other feels like..." "Like what?" I prompted when she trailed off. "Like a reminder that I don't know what I'm doing," she admitted. "That I need experts and expensive products to be a good mother." I chose my next words with care. "Every mother doubts herself. It's normal. But you know Emma better than anyone. Better than me. Better than your mother. Certainly better than Dr. Winters. Trust that knowledge." Rebecca looked down at her daughter, sleeping peacefully in my arms. I think I'm starting to. As I prepared to leave later that afternoon, Rebecca walked me to the door, Emma now awake and alert in her arms. "Would you like to come on Monday as well?" she asked, surprising me. "Michael has an early meeting, and I thought maybe we could take Emma for a walk if the weather's nice." "I'd love that," I replied, careful not to seem too eager. "Just let me know what time works best." "Around 10? We could walk to that little park at the end of the street." I nodded, recognizing the significance of this invitation. Not just a visit in the privacy of their home, where the Wilsons' social circle wouldn't observe us, but a public outing, a visible acknowledgement of my place in their lives. 10 is perfect, I confirmed. As I drove home, I reflected on the remarkable evolution of the past 2 weeks. From being banned from the hospital to being invited for additional visits, from being treated as an unwelcome outsider to being trusted with Emma's care. It was a transformation I wouldn't have thought possible on that painful day when Michael had delivered Rebecca's exclusion. But I also recognized the fragility of this new arrangement. Catherine Wilson would not easily cede her influence, and Rebecca's independence was still tentative, emerging slowly after years of deferring to her parents' expectations and values. There would be setbacks, regressions, moments when old patterns reasserted themselves. The key, I decided, was to focus not on competing with the Wilsons or asserting my own importance, but on being genuinely helpful to Rebecca and Michael, on building a relationship with Emma based on love rather than obligation or status. My call to the hospital board had opened the door, but it was these quieter moments of connection, teaching Rebecca to ease Emma's discomfort, preparing nourishing food, offering rest to an exhausted new mother, that would ultimately secure my place in their lives. That evening, I received a text from Michael. "Mom, just wanted to say thanks for today. Rebecca said you were amazing with Emma. See you Monday." It wasn't dramatic or effusive, but coming from my reserved son, it spoke volumes. I texted back simply, "Looking forward to it. Love you both." As I prepared for bed, I found myself thinking about the plaque in the neonatal unit, the one bearing my name that had caught Michael's attention during Emma's brief stay there. At the time I'd made the donation, it had seemed almost embarrassing, the public recognition feeling at odds with my private nature. but now I recognized its unexpected gift. It had given Michael a tangible reminder of my contributions, my values, my place in the world beyond being his mother. Sometimes, I reflected, we need to be seen clearly to be truly appreciated. For years, I had worked quietly in the background, supporting without demanding acknowledgement, giving without expectation of return. But that approach had allowed both Michael and the Wilsons to take me for granted, to dismiss my worth and contributions. By finally standing up for myself, by refusing to be erased from my grandchild's birth, by leveraging the influence I had legitimately earned through decades of service and significant financial support. I hadn't been acting selfishly or vindictively as Catherine had suggested. I had simply been insisting on being seen, on having my place in the family recognized and respected. The journey ahead would require continued patience and careful navigation. But for the first time since Michael had fallen under the Wilsons' influence, I felt hopeful about our future as a family, not perfect or without conflict, but authentic and balanced, with room for all of us to contribute to Emma's life in our own ways. And perhaps most importantly, I had rediscovered my own voice, my own worth beyond the roles of mother and grandmother. In standing up for my place in Emma's life, I had also reclaimed something essential for myself. The knowledge that sacrifice without boundaries isn't love. It's erasure. And I had always deserved, to be more than a silent, self-effacing presence in the background of my family's story. By the time Emma reached 3 months, our arrangement had settled into a comfortable rhythm. I visited regularly on Tuesdays and Fridays, with occasional additional days when Rebecca needed extra support. The rigid time restrictions had gradually loosened, and I no longer received countdown warnings about when my visits should end. Instead, I often stayed through dinner, sometimes even helping put Emma to bed with the bath and bedtime routine I'd established. Warm water with just a few drops of lavender, gentle massage with unscented lotion, and a quiet singing of the Kai, same lullaby I'd once sung to Michael. Catherine Wilson continued her frequent visits, but something had shifted in the household dynamic. Rebecca had begun to assert herself more confidently, particularly regarding Emma's care. When Catherine insisted that Emma needed to start sleep training at exactly 12 weeks according to the latest parenting book she'd purchased, Rebecca had calmly but firmly disagreed. "We're going to follow Emma's cues," she'd said, her voice steady even as Catherine's expression darkened with disapproval. "She'll let us know when she's ready." Later, when we were alone, Rebecca had confided in me. "I never used to contradict Mom," she admitted, watching Emma play on her activity mat. "About anything. It just wasn't worth the drama." "What changed?" I asked, genuinely curious about her growing confidence. She considered the question thoughtfully. "I think, becoming a mother myself. Realizing that sometimes the experts don't have all the answers. And seeing how you approach things, offering suggestions without insisting, showing me techniques but respecting that I make the final decisions about Emma. It's made me realize there's another way to parent besides my mother's way. It was perhaps the greatest compliment she could have given me, though I was careful not to appear too triumphant. This wasn't about winning some competition with Catherine. It was about helping Rebecca find her own path as a mother. The true test of our evolving relationship came when Emma developed her first significant illness, an ear infection that left her feverish, inconsolable, and unable to sleep for more than 30 minutes at a stretch. Michael called me at 3 a.m, his voice tight with worry. "Mom, I hate to ask, but could you come over? Rebecca's been up with Emma for 2 nights straight, and we're at our wits' end. The pediatrician says it's just an ear infection, and prescribed antibiotics. But she's so uncomfortable." "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I promised, already reaching for clothes. When I arrived, the house was in disarray, a stark contrast to its usual immaculate appearance. Dishes were piled in the sink, laundry was scattered across the living room sofa, and the air smelled of sour milk and diaper cream. Michael met me at the door, unshaven and bleary-eyed. "Thank you for coming," he said, the relief in his voice palpable. "Rebecca's upstairs with Emma. She finally fell asleep about 10 minutes ago, but I'm afraid it won't last." I followed, him upstairs to find Rebecca dozing awkwardly in the nursery rocking chair, Emma flushed and restless against her chest. My daughter-in-law's eyes fluttered open as we entered, momentary confusion giving way to naked relief when she saw me. "Joan," she whispered, careful not to disturb the finally sleeping baby. "I'm so sorry to drag you out in the middle of the night." "Don't be ridiculous," I said softly, moving to her side. "This is what grandmothers are for." I gently placed my hand on Emma's forehead, confirming what I already suspected. Her fever was still quite high despite the medication. "Has she been taking the antibiotics?" Rebecca nodded wearily. "We started them yesterday afternoon, but the doctor said it might take 24 to 48 hours to see improvement. She's just so miserable in the meantime." "And when did you last take something for pain?" I asked, noting the way Rebecca winced as she shifted in the chair. "I'm fine," she insisted unconvincingly. "You have mastitis," I diagnosed, recognizing the symptoms from decades of nursing experience. "Fever, body aches, that red patch I can see on your breast through your nightgown." Rebecca blushed slightly but nodded. "Dr. Winters said if it's not better by morning, I should come in for antibiotics." I carefully kept my expression neutral, though internally I was exasperated that the pediatrician hadn't taken Rebecca's symptoms more seriously. Mastitis could quickly become severe, and she was clearly already in significant discomfort. "Here's what we're going to do," I said, my nursing supervisor voice emerging naturally. "You're going to give Emma to Michael and take a hot shower, as hot as you can stand, letting the water run directly on the affected breast. Then you're going to take some ibuprofen and go to bed. I'll watch Emma for the rest of the night, and in the morning, we'll call Dr. Peterson." "Who's Dr. Peterson?" Rebecca asked. "My doctor. She's an excellent GP who takes nursing mothers. Seriously, she'll call in a prescription without making you drag yourself and a sick baby to her office." Rebecca hesitated, clearly torn between her instinct to handle everything herself and her desperate need for rest. "Rebecca," I said gently, "you can't take care of Emma if you don't take care of yourself first. Let me help you both." After a moment's consideration, she nodded, carefully transferring Emma to Michael's arms. The baby stirred but didn't wake. Her little face flushed with fever. "Bring her to our room when she wakes up," Rebecca instructed me. "She'll need to nurse." "Actually," I suggested, "let's try giving her a bottle for one feeding. I brought some breast milk storage bags. You can pump after your shower to relieve pressure and give yourself a slightly longer stretch of sleep." The fact that Rebecca agreed without protest told me just how exhausted she truly was. Under normal circumstances, she might have resisted, worried about nipple confusion or following the strict breastfeeding schedule she'd established. After she and Michael retreated to their bedroom, I settled into the rocking chair with Emma, studying my granddaughter's feverish face with professional assessment and grandmotherly concern. Her ear infection was causing real pain, despite the pediatrician's somewhat dismissive attitude. I made a mental note to suggest they consider a different doctor, not Catherine's society pediatrician with his condescending manner, but perhaps my colleague Susan's daughter, who had recently opened a family practice nearby and was known for her warm, collaborative approach with parents. Emma woke just half an hour later, her discomfort evident in her fretful cries and the way she tugged at her ear. I checked the time, too soon for more medication, and tried all the non-pharmaceutical comfort measures I'd learned over decades of nursing. Holding her upright against my shoulder to reduce pressure in her ear, gently rocking in a figure 8, motion that seemed to soothe her, singing softly the same lullabies that had once calmed her father. When Michael appeared in the doorway around 5 in the morning, he found us by the nursery window. Emma finally sleeping against my chest as I pointed out the first hints of dawn lighting the eastern sky. "You got her to sleep," he marveled. His voice hushed with amazement. "Old nurse's tricks," I smiled. "Nothing magical, just persistence and a lot of rocking. How's Rebecca?" "Finally sleeping soundly," he reported. "I don't think she's had more than an hour at a stretch in days." "Let her rest as long as possible," I advised. "I'll give Emma her medicine when it's time and keep her comfortable. You should try to get some more sleep, too." He hesitated. "Mom, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking," I interrupted gently. "I'm offering, and I've managed plenty of night shifts in my career. I'll be fine." The gratitude in his eyes took me back to his childhood, to skinned knees I'd bandaged, nightmares I'd soothed, school projects I'd helped complete in late-night sessions at the kitchen table. For years, it had been just the two of us against the world, a team navigating life's challenges together. Somehow, amid the wedding planning and the Wilson family's overwhelming presence, that fundamental connection had been obscured. But in this quiet pre-dawn moment, with his daughter in my arms, I could see it re-emerging. The trust, the recognition, the acknowledgement of our shared history. "Try to get a few more hours of sleep," I encouraged. "Emma and I will be fine, and I'll wake you if anything changes." He nodded, glancing once more at his sleeping daughter before retreating down the hallway. The morning brought both crisis and resolution. Emma's fever spiked again despite the medication, her cries becoming more distressed. Rebecca's condition had also worsened, her temperature climbing as the mastitis spread. By the time Dr. Peterson returned my call, I was managing a household in full medical crisis mode. "Joan?" Dr. Peterson's familiar voice was reassuringly calm after I explained the situation. "I'm calling in prescriptions for Rebecca now, antibiotics and proper pain management. As for the baby, I don't like the sound of that fever persisting. Despite treatment, their pediatrician should see her today." "Dr. Winters has no openings until Monday," I explained, repeating what the dismissive receptionist had told Michael earlier. "He suggested going to urgent care if we're really concerned." Dr. Peterson's disapproval was evident even through the phone. Ridiculous. A 3-month-old with a high fever should be seen immediately. Who is this Winters character? No, never. Mind, call Susan Mitchell's daughter, Eliza. She's excellent with children and makes time for genuinely ill patients. Tell her I sent you. By 9 that morning, I had picked up Rebecca's prescriptions, arranged an appointment with Dr. Mitchell for Emma at 11, prepared bottles of the frozen breast milk Rebecca had stored, and started a batch of homemade chicken soup. The household was running with hospital-like efficiency under my direction, a fact that wasn't lost on Catherine Wilson when she arrived unannounced at 10, dressed immaculately as always, carrying several shopping bags. "Joan," she said, clearly surprised to find me answering the door. "I didn't realize you would be here. I brought some organic baby food recommended by Dr. Winters. He thinks Emma should start solids early. And a humidifier that uses special eucalyptus inserts. Where's Rebecca?" "Resting," I replied, stepping aside to let her in. "She has mastitis and is on antibiotics now. Emma's ear infection has worsened, so we're taking her to Dr. Mitchell at 11. Catherine's perfectly penciled eyebrows drew together in confusion. "Dr. Mitchell? Who is that?" "They see Dr. Winters." "Dr. Winters couldn't accommodate us today," I explained, keeping my voice neutral. "Emma needs to be seen immediately, not Monday." Catherine set down her bags with a deliberate motion that suggested displeasure. "I'll call Jeffrey. He'll see them if I explain the situation." "That won't be necessary," I said firmly. "The appointment with Dr. Mitchell is already arranged, and she came highly recommended by my colleague." Catherine's expression tightened. "Joan, I know you mean well, but we've carefully selected all of Rebecca and Michael's healthcare providers. Dr. Winters has been our family pediatrician for 2 generations. I could have pointed out that carefully selected seemed to mean socially connected rather than medically superior, but I refrained. This wasn't the moment for that particular battle. The priority right now is getting Emma seen today, I said instead. Rebecca is too ill to take her anywhere, so I'll be handling the appointment. I'll take her, Catherine volunteered immediately. There's no need for you to rearrange your day. I'm already here, and I'm familiar with Emma's symptoms throughout the night, I countered. And as a medical professional, I can communicate effectively with the doctor. We stood at an impasse in the foyer, the tension palpable between us. It was Rebecca who broke it, appearing at the top of the stairs in her bathrobe, looking pale but determined. "Mom," she said to Catherine, her voice hoarse. "Joan's been here all night with Emma. She knows exactly what's been happening and she's arranged everything we need. I'd like her to take Emma to the appointment." Catherine's surprise at being directly contradicted by her daughter was evident, but she rallied quickly. "Darling, you look terrible. Let me help you back to bed, and then I can handle things from here." "I'm going back to bed," Rebecca agreed, "but Joan has everything under control. The new doctor was her recommendation, and I trust her judgment." The simple statement, "I trust her judgment," hung in the air between us, its significance unmistakable. Not just about this medical decision, but a broader acknowledgement of my role and value in their lives. Catherine's mouth tightened briefly before she manufactured a smile. "Of course, if that's what you prefer. I'll just put these things in the kitchen and then perhaps I'll sit with you while Joan takes Emma to her appointment." It was a reasonable compromise, and I nodded my agreement. I've made soup for when Rebecca's feeling up to eating, and there are prepared bottles in the refrigerator for Emma. As Catherine disappeared into the kitchen, Rebecca gave me a small, tired smile. "Thank you," she said simply, before returning to her bedroom. The appointment with Dr. Mitchell proved to be a turning point in Emma's care. Unlike Dr. Winters with his authoritative pronouncements and impatience for parents' questions, Dr. Mitchell took time to examine Emma thoroughly, listen to my detailed account of her symptoms, and explain her treatment recommendations. "This is a significant ear infection," she confirmed, her manner warm but professional. "I'd like to switch her to a different antibiotic and add some eardrops for pain relief. Also, has anyone checked for silent reflux? Some of these symptoms could be compounded by acid irritation." No one had suggested reflux, despite Emma's frequent discomfort after feeding and her tendency to arch her back. Symptoms I had noticed but hadn't connected. Dr. Mitchell's attentiveness confirmed my impression that she was exactly the kind of pediatrician Emma needed: thorough, thoughtful, and respectful of parental observations. "Would you be accepting new patients?" I asked as she wrote the prescriptions. "I think my son and daughter-in-law might prefer to switch Emma's care to your practice permanently." Dr. Mitchell smiled. "We're technically not accepting new patients, but for Dr. Peterson's colleague and her family, I'll make an exception. Emma seems like a wonderful baby, and I'd be happy to be her doctor." When we returned from the appointment, I found a transformed scene at the house. Catherine had clearly been busy in our absence. The kitchen was spotless, laundry folded, and fresh flowers had appeared on the coffee table. Rebecca was resting on the living room sofa, looking slightly better after her medication had begun to take effect. "The doctor wants to change Emma's antibiotic," I reported, carefully transferring my still fussy granddaughter to Rebecca's arms. "And she thinks Emma might have reflux complicating things." I explained Dr. Mitchell's findings and recommendations, aware of Catherine hovering nearby, listening intently. "She sounds very thorough," Rebecca commented, adjusting Emma against her shoulder. "Did you like her, Joan?" "Very much," I confirmed. "She takes time with her patients, listens carefully, and explains everything clearly. She's agreed to accept Emma as a new patient if you'd like to switch." I was careful not to look at Catherine as I delivered this information, though I could practically feel her stiffening. "Switch from Dr. Winters?" Catherine interjected, her tone suggesting I'd proposed something outlandish. Rebecca, your entire family has seen Jeffrey Winters for 3 generations. He's the most respected pediatrician in the region. Rebecca didn't immediately respond, her attention focused on administering the eardrops to a squirming Emma. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but firm. "I think we might try Dr. Mitchell for a while," she said. Emma seemed to respond well to her approach, and she's much closer to our house. "Closer to your house? That's hardly a criterion for selecting a physician," Catherine dismissed. "And what will Jeffrey think? He's been expecting to care for Emma her entire childhood, just as he did for you." "Mom," Rebecca said, a new steadiness in her voice despite her illness. "I appreciate that Dr. Winters has been our family pediatrician, but Emma is my daughter, and Michael and I will make the final decision about her health care." The silence that followed was weighted with significance. It was perhaps the first time Rebecca had directly contradicted her mother on a matter Catherine considered her domain. "I busied myself organizing Emma's new medications, giving them space for this moment of reckoning." "I see," Catherine finally said, her tone carefully controlled. "Well, it's your decision, of course. Though I think you might reconsider when you're feeling better. These antibiotics can cloud your judgment." Rebecca didn't rise to the bait, simply nodding tiredly. "We'll see. Right now, I'm just grateful that Emma's getting proper treatment." I stepped in smoothly, redirecting the conversation. "Emma needs her medication now, and Rebecca should have something to eat with her antibiotics. Catherine, would you mind warming some of the soup while I help with Emma's drops?" This practical approach, giving Catherine a task while I handled the medical aspects, diffused the immediate tension. But the underlying shift was unmistakable. Rebecca had begun to make decisions independently, guided by what she felt was best for Emma rather than by her mother's expectations or social considerations. That evening, after Catherine had finally departed, with promises to return the next day with more supplies and advice, Michael, Rebecca, and I sat in the living room, Emma sleeping peacefully for the first time in days thanks to her new medication. The exhaustion of the medical crisis hung over us, but there was also a sense of quiet accomplishment. We had weathered this first significant challenge together. "I can't thank you enough, Mom," Michael said, his voice low to avoid waking the baby. "I don't know what we would have done without you today." "That's what family is for," I replied simply. Rebecca shifted on the sofa, adjusting the cold compress I'd prepared for her breast. "It's more than that," she said. "Your medical knowledge, your calm under pressure, knowing exactly who to call and what to do." She paused, seeming to search for the right words. It made me realize something important. "What's that?" I asked. "That there's a difference between help that actually helps and help that doesn't." She glanced toward the door through which Catherine had departed. "My mother means well, but her assistance often comes with expectations, judgments, and complications. Yours just helps." It was a profound observation, and I recognized the courage it took for Rebecca to articulate it, even in this private setting. For years, she had operated under the assumption that the Wilson way was inherently superior, more sophisticated, more correct, more socially advantageous. Recognizing the limitations of that approach, especially regarding her daughter's well-being, represented a significant evolution in her thinking. "Different people help in different ways," I said diplomatically. "Your mother brought beautiful flowers and cleaned the kitchen. Those things matter too." Rebecca smiled tiredly. "Always taking the high road, Joan. But we both know there's more to it than that." Later, after Rebecca had gone to bed and Michael was settling Emma in the nursery, I found myself alone in the kitchen, preparing a final bottle for the night shift. The events of the day had been exhausting but deeply satisfying. For perhaps the first time since Emma's birth, I felt fully integrated into her care. My contributions valued, not just tolerated. Mom? Michael's voice startled me from my thoughts. He stood in the kitchen doorway, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Can I ask you something? Of course, I replied, setting aside the bottle. Why didn't you push back sooner? He asked. Against the Wilsons? Against how they treated you? Why wait until the hospital situation to finally stand your ground? It was a fair question, one I'd asked myself many times during the long, lonely months of being gradually sidelined in my son's life. I was afraid, I admitted after a moment's reflection. Afraid that if I objected, if I made waves, I'd only push you further away. The Wilsons had so much to offer you. Connections, opportunities, a lifestyle I couldn't provide. I thought if I just accepted whatever role they allowed me, at least I'd still have some place in your life. Michael's face softened with understanding and regret. I made you feel that way, didn't I? Like you had to compete for a place in my life. Not intentionally, I assured him. But yes, there were times when it seemed like the Wilson family package deal was replacing everything we'd built together. He moved further into the kitchen, leaning against the counter beside me. I got caught up in it all, he acknowledged. The prestige, the connections, the sense of entering a world that had always seemed closed to people like us. And Rebecca. She was part of that world in a way that seemed magical to me. I wanted to belong there with her. That's natural, I said. The Wilsons represented opportunities you'd worked hard to access. And Rebecca is a wonderful person, despite our rocky start. But I lost perspective, he continued. I started seeing everything through their lens, valuing what they valued, dismissing what they dismissed, including you. He looked at me directly, his expression somber. I'm sorry, Mom, for how I let them treat you, for how I treated you, myself. You deserved better. The simple apology touched something deep within me, a wound I hadn't fully acknowledged even to myself. Thank you, I said softly. That means a lot. When you called the hospital board, he continued, it shocked me. Not just what you did, but that you had that kind of influence at all. I realized I'd fallen into thinking of you the way the Wilsons did, as just my ordinary mom from an ordinary background. I'd forgotten everything you've accomplished, everything you've built. I'm still just your ordinary mom, I smiled. The donation didn't change that. No, he disagreed. You're extraordinary. You always have been. I just lost sight of it. For a while. We stood together in comfortable silence, the quiet punctuated only by the gentle hum of the refrigerator and distant sounds of the sleeping household. Rebecca wants to ask you something, Michael finally said, but she's hesitant, afraid you might say no after everything that's happened. What is it? I asked, curious. She'd like you to stay for a while, not just overnight, but for a week, or 2, until she's fully recovered and Emma's infection has cleared. She's realized she needs help, real help, not just her mother's version of it. But she's worried you might have had enough of us and our drama. The request touched me deeply, not just the practical need for my assistance, but the implicit acknowledgement of my value, of the unique contribution I could make to their lives during this challenging time. Of course I'll stay, I said without hesitation, as long as you both need me. Michael's relief was palpable. Thank you. I've taken family leave from work, but I'm not as good at the practical aspects of baby care as you are. And Rebecca. Well, she's finally admitting she can't do everything perfectly on her own. A difficult but important lesson for any new mother, I observed, especially one with Rebecca's standards. The following morning, I awoke early to the sound of Emma's fussing through the baby monitor I'd set up in the guest room. Rising quickly, I found Rebecca already in the nursery, looking more rested, but still clearly unwell. You should be in bed, I scolded gently, moving to take Emma from her arms. I heard her and couldn't stay away, Rebecca admitted. But I'm feeling a bit dizzy when I stand. That's the mastitis and antibiotics, I explained, guiding her to the rocking chair. Sit here and hold Emma while I get you some water and toast. You need to keep your strength up to fight the infection. Rebecca complied without argument, another indication of how ill she truly felt. As I turned to leave, she caught my hand. Joan, she said hesitantly, Michael told you what I asked? About staying longer? He did, I confirmed. And I'd be happy to stay as long as you need me. Relief washed over her face. Thank you. I know it's a lot to ask, especially after everything. That's behind us now, I assured her. What matters is getting you and Emma healthy. She nodded, then added with unexpected candor. My mother won't like it. She'll see it as encroachment on her territory. It was the first time Rebecca had so directly acknowledged the territorial nature of Catherine's behavior, and I appreciated her honesty. We'll manage, I said simply. The focus needs to be on what's best for you and Emma right now, not on anyone's feelings about territories or roles. Rebecca's smile was tired, but genuine. That's why I want you here. You always seem to know exactly what we need, without making it about you. The compliment warmed me, but I deflected it lightly. Years of nursing. You learn to focus on the patient's needs, not your own ego. But as I headed downstairs to prepare breakfast, I reflected on the sea change these words represented. From being banned from the hospital to being explicitly requested to stay and help, it was a transformation I wouldn't have thought possible just months ago. The key, I realized, had been finding the balance between standing my ground and offering genuine support without conditions. My call to the hospital board had opened the door, asserting my right to be present at Emma's birth. But it was what came after, the practical help, the medical knowledge shared without judgment, the respect for Rebecca and Michael as parents, that had truly secured my place in their lives. As I moved around the kitchen, preparing the simple breakfast that would help Rebecca regain her strength, I felt a deep sense of contentment despite the medical worries and inevitable complications ahead. We had found our way to a new understanding, one built not on obligation or hierarchy, but on genuine appreciation for what each of us could contribute to Emma's well-being. And in the process, I had reclaimed not just my place in my son's family, but a fuller sense of my own worth, not defined solely by sacrifice or service, but by the unique strengths, knowledge, and love I brought to our shared journey. The woman, who had once been banned from the hospital, was now an essential presence in this household, invited and valued for exactly who she was. My extended stay at Michael and Rebecca's home gradually shifted from emergency intervention to comfortable routine. The guest room became Gran's room, complete with a nursery monitor and a small basket of Emma's essentials for the nights when I took over and let the exhausted parents sleep. Rebecca's mastitis improved with proper antibiotics, and Emma's ear infection cleared under Dr. Mitchell's care, but I remained at their request, finding my place in the daily rhythm of their household. Catherine Wilson's reaction to this arrangement evolved from thinly veiled disapproval to reluctant acceptance as she observed the practical benefits of my presence. Initially, she had increased the frequency of her visits, arriving at unpredictable hours with expensive baby items and pointed questions about how long I intended to stay. But even Catherine couldn't maintain that level of territorial vigilance indefinitely, especially when Rebecca began quietly but firmly establishing boundaries. "Mom," she said one afternoon when Catherine arrived unannounced during Emma's nap, we appreciate your visits, but we really need you to call first. Emma's schedule is finally stabilizing, and unexpected interruptions make it harder." The request, reasonable and calmly delivered, had clearly shocked Catherine, whose expression fluctuated between disbelief and affronted dignity. I've never needed an appointment to see my own grandchild before, she replied stiffly. It's not about appointments, Rebecca explained, her newfound confidence evident in her steady tone. It's about respecting our home and Emma's needs. Joan calls before she comes over, too. The pointed comparison wasn't lost on Catherine, whose gaze flickered toward me where I sat quietly folding baby laundry, careful not to insert myself into their conversation. I see, Catherine said after a moment, lips pressed into a thin line. Well, I wouldn't want to disrupt precious nap time. Perhaps I'll come back when it's more convenient. Tomorrow would be perfect, Rebecca offered, her tone softening. Around 11? Emma is usually at her best then, and we'd love to see you. This diplomatic redirection, not rejecting Catherine but channeling her visits into more suitable times, represented significant growth in Rebecca's ability to manage her mother. Later, after Catherine had departed with obvious reluctance, Rebecca sank onto the sofa beside me with a deep sigh. That was harder than I expected, she admitted, reaching for the cup of tea I'd prepared in anticipation of her needing comfort after the confrontation. You handled it beautifully, I assured her. Clear but kind. That's the perfect approach with someone like your mother. Rebecca smiled wryly. You make it sound so simple. I've spent my entire life avoiding any conflict with her. What changed? I asked, genuinely curious about her evolution. She considered the question thoughtfully, absently folding a tiny onesie from the laundry basket between us. Becoming a mother myself. Watching you demonstrate that there are different ways to love and support someone without controlling them. She glanced up, her expression serious. And honestly, seeing what happened at the hospital, how Mom encouraged me to exclude you, and how deeply unfair that was. It made me reevaluate a lot of things. It was the most direct acknowledgement she'd made of the hospital incident since our initial, fraught conversation, and I appreciated her willingness to revisit it now with greater perspective. We all did what we thought was right at the time, I said gently, not wanting her to carry unnecessary guilt. No, she disagreed, surprising me with her frankness. I did what was easy, what avoided conflict with my mother. That's not the same as doing what's right. She folded another tiny garment with deliberate care. I've been doing that most of my life, taking the path of least resistance with her. But now I have Emma to consider, and I need to be stronger than that. Her self-awareness touched me deeply, and I reached over to squeeze her hand. You're already stronger than you realize. That conversation just now proved it. The following day brought a subtle but significant shift in Catherine's approach. She arrived precisely at 11, bearing a single tasteful gift rather than her usual abundance of unnecessary items. Throughout her visit, she made visible efforts to follow the baby's cues, even asking Rebecca's permission before picking Emma up from her playmat. You're looking well, she observed as Rebecca prepared coffee in the kitchen. The antibiotics must be working. They are, Rebecca confirmed, and having Joan here has been incredible. I'm getting actual sleep at night since she helps with the night feedings. Catherine's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Yes, well, you know I offered to hire a night nurse. Several of my friends have used Nightingale services with great success. I know and I appreciate that, Rebecca replied. But Joan already knows Emma's preferences and our household routines, and there's something special about Emma being cared for by family instead of staff. The subtle rebuke, comparing professional help to grandmother's love, wasn't lost on Catherine, whose expression flickered briefly before she recovered her composure. Of course, family is important, she agreed smoothly. Speaking of which, your father and I were hoping you might bring Emma to the club for Sunday brunch this weekend. The Andersons are dying to meet her, and they'll be in town just for the day. I busied myself with wiping down the countertop, giving mother and daughter space for this negotiation. The Andersons, I'd learned, were influential business associates of Edward Wilson, the kind of connection Catherine valued immensely. This Sunday won't work, Rebecca said, her voice gentle but firm. Emma has her 2-week follow-up with Dr. Mitchell on Monday, and we're keeping her home this weekend to ensure she's fully recovered from the ear infection. Catherine frowned. Surely a social brunch won't affect a doctor's appointment the next day? Dr. Mitchell specifically recommended limiting Emma's exposure to groups until we're certain the infection is completely resolved, Rebecca explained. Her immune system is still developing. Well, I'm sure Jeffrey Winters would have a different opinion on that, Catherine sniffed, referencing her preferred pediatrician. He never believed in isolating infants unnecessarily. We're following Dr. Mitchell's guidance now? Rebecca replied, her tone still pleasant but with unmistakable finality. Perhaps we could plan something the following weekend. Emma would love to see her grandfather. This diplomatic compromise, acknowledging Catherine's desire for family gatherings while maintaining her own boundaries about Emma's health, demonstrated Rebecca's growing skill at navigating her mother's expectations without simply capitulating to them. Catherine didn't look entirely pleased, but she nodded. I suppose that would work. I'll have to rearrange a few things, but family comes first. After Catherine's departure, Rebecca joined me in the nursery, where I was organizing Emma's rapidly multiplying wardrobe. You know what I just realized? She said, leaning against the doorframe. That's the first time I've ever directly said no to one of Mom's social engagements. Usually, I just rearrange my entire life to accommodate whatever she's planned. How does it feel? I asked, folding a tiny cardigan. Terrifying, she admitted with a small laugh. But also, right. Emma's health is more important than the Andersons seeing her on their preferred schedule. That's called being a mother, I observed. Putting your child's needs ahead of social obligations or other people's expectations. Even when those expectations come from your own mother, Rebecca added thoughtfully. Especially then, I agreed, recalling my own struggles to establish boundaries with my well-meaning but intermittently domineering mother when Michael was small. It's one of the hardest parts of parenting, recognizing when the patterns from your own childhood aren't necessarily what's best for your child. Rebecca studied me with newfound curiosity. Was it like this for you? With your mother when Michael was born? I considered her question, appreciating her interest in my experience rather than just Catherine's precedent. In some ways, my mother had very specific ideas about childcare based on her generation's approaches. She couldn't understand why I didn't want to let Michael cry it out, or why I nursed him past 6 months. I smiled at the memory. We had some heated discussions about it. How did you resolve them? Rebecca asked, genuinely engaged. Mostly by being clear about my boundaries while acknowledging her good intentions, I explained, and by recognizing that her advice, even when outdated, came from a place of love and experience. I folded the last of Emma's sleepers and placed it in the drawer. The key was finding the balance between respecting her wisdom and trusting my own instincts as Michael's mother. Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. That's what I'm trying to learn now. The balance. As the days passed, that balance became increasingly evident in Rebecca's interactions not just with Catherine but with me as well. She began to sort through the abundant advice and opinions offered by both grandmothers, selectively implementing what resonated with her own developing maternal instincts and gently declining the rest. It wasn't about rejecting either grandmother's wisdom, but about finding her own path as Emma's mother. Michael, too, was evolving in his relationship with both families. The crisis of Emma's illness had crystallized something important for him. The recognition that practical support during difficult moments often revealed more about true family bonds than social connections or financial advantages ever could. I've been thinking about the job at Lancaster Financial, he told me one evening as we sat on the back patio, watching the sunset while Rebecca put Emma down for the night. Lancaster was the prestigious firm where Edward Wilson had secured him. A position through his connections, a job that paid exceptionally well, but required grueling hours and extensive travel. "What about it?" I asked, noting the contemplative expression on his face. "I'm considering leaving," he admitted, looking for something with more reasonable hours, maybe even revisiting my original interest in teaching economics. This potential reversal of his career path, moving away from the high-status trajectory the Wilsons had encouraged toward something closer to his original passion, represented a significant shift in his priorities. "What brought this on?" I inquired, careful not to betray my personal feelings about a job that had always seemed poorly suited to his temperament and values. He gazed out over the neatly landscaped yard, the setting sun casting long shadows across the grass. "Emma's illness, mainly. Being here with her, seeing how quickly these early days are passing. I missed her first real smile because I was in Chicago for a client meeting." He shook his head. "And when she and Rebecca were both sick, I realized I didn't want to be the father who's only peripherally involved, who misses the important moments because work always comes first." The parallels to his own childhood, where his father had been present but often preoccupied with career ambitions before his untimely death, weren't lost on either of us. "Have you discussed this with Rebecca?" I asked, knowing how thoroughly their lifestyle was built around his substantial income. "A little," he acknowledged. "She's been surprisingly supportive of the idea. More so than I expected, actually." He glanced at me with a rueful smile. "She said something interesting, that watching your career choices made her reconsider what really matters in the long run." "My career choices?" I repeated, surprised. "How you chose work that allowed you to be present for me growing up, even if it meant less prestige or money than you might have earned otherwise," he explained. Rebecca mentioned that despite her family's wealth, she rarely saw her father during her childhood. He was always working, building the business, maintaining their social position. She said she doesn't want that for Emma. This insight into Rebecca's thinking touched me deeply. The recognition that wealth and status came with their own costs, ones she was increasingly unwilling to accept for her daughter. "Whatever you decide," I told him, "I support you. But I'm glad you're considering what kind of life you want, not just what kind of career." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's something I lost sight of for a while. Getting caught up in the Wilsons' world, their values and priorities. It took Emma's birth and then her illness to really clarify what matters most to me." This recalibration of values, both Michael's and Rebecca's, continued to manifest in subtle but meaningful ways throughout my extended stay. They began discussing a potential move to a smaller house in a neighborhood between Westlake and Oakridge, one that would reduce their mortgage but place them further from the Wilsons' scrutiny. Rebecca started exploring part-time work options that would allow her a professional identity without sacrificing time with Emma. Michael initiated conversations with the local community college about teaching possibilities. None of these changes happened overnight, and none were explicitly framed as rejections of the Wilson lifestyle. But collectively, they represented a significant shift toward independence and self-determination, a young family defining their own values rather than simply adopting those of the more dominant grandparents. Through it all, I maintained my supportive presence, offering practical help and occasional gentle guidance while carefully respecting their authority as parents. I was mindful of not overstepping, of not becoming the mirror image of Catherine, with her tendency to override and direct. This balanced approach, being available without being intrusive, seemed to reassure them both that accepting my help didn't mean surrendering their autonomy. The most profound test of our evolving family dynamic came unexpectedly when Emma was nearly 5 months old. I had finally returned to my own home, though I still visited regularly and occasionally stayed overnight when Michael traveled for work. The household had found its rhythm, with Rebecca growing increasingly confident in her mothering, and the tension with Catherine reduced to manageable levels through clear but respectful boundaries. Then came the call that changed everything. My colleague Susan had suffered a major stroke and was in critical condition at Riverside Memorial. As her medical power of attorney and closest friend, I needed to be at the hospital immediately and potentially for an extended period. The call came as I was preparing to drive to Michael and Rebecca's for my regular Friday visit. "I'm so sorry, but I won't be able to come today after all," I explained to Rebecca over the phone, quickly gathering my essential items. "Susan's had a stroke, and I need to get to Riverside right away." "Of course," Rebecca said immediately. "Don't worry about us. Is there anything we can do to help you?" "No, but thank you for offering. I'll keep you updated," I promised, already heading for my car. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of medical consultations, difficult decisions, and bedside vigils as Susan's condition fluctuated between critical and grave. I barely left the hospital, sleeping in short bursts on the uncomfortable recliner in her ICU room, eating whatever was available from vending machines or the cafeteria when I remembered to eat it all. It was during one of these exhausted moments, staring blankly at the limited sandwich selection in the cafeteria at nearly midnight, that I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Joan." I turned to find Rebecca standing there, a large insulated bag in her hands, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she'd come directly from putting Emma to bed. "Rebecca," I said, surprised and confused by her presence. "What are you doing here? Is everything all right with Emma?" "Emma's fine," she assured me quickly. "She's with Michael. I'm here because of you." She lifted the bag she was carrying. "I brought you some actual food, homemade soup, sandwiches, fruit, and those oatmeal cookies you like. And a change of clothes, toiletries, and a real pillow for that awful chair you've been sleeping in." The thoughtfulness of this gesture, practical help offered without fanfare or obligation, moved me almost to tears in my exhausted state. "You didn't have to do this," I managed, accepting the bag with genuine gratitude. "No, I didn't," she agreed, her voice gentle but firm. "Just like you didn't have to come over at 3 a.m. when Emma was sick, or stay for weeks to help us get back on our feet, or rearrange your entire schedule to accommodate our needs." She met my gaze directly. "But that's what family does, isn't it? Steps up when it matters, without being asked." The deliberate echo of my own words. From months earlier, what I'd said when explaining why I'd come to their aid during Emma's illness wasn't lost on me. Rebecca was not only returning the practical support I'd offered, but acknowledging the deeper lesson about what true family means. "Thank you," I said simply, too emotionally and physically drained for more elaborate expressions of gratitude. "How is Susan?" she asked as we found a quiet table in the corner of the nearly empty cafeteria. I explained Susan's condition, the medical complexities, and the difficult decisions ahead regarding her care. Rebecca listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions that reflected both genuine concern and her growing understanding of medical matters gleaned from Emma's experiences. "What can we do to help?" she asked when I'd finished my update. "Not just tonight, but in the days ahead. You're going to need support too, not just Susan." The offer was so sincere, so free of the calculation or obligation that often characterized the Wilsons' gestures of assistance, that I found myself truly considering what would be helpful rather than automatically declining out of habit. "I might need someone to water my plants and collect my mail if this goes on for a while," I admitted. "And perhaps occasionally bring fresh clothes to the hospital." "Consider it done," Rebecca nodded. "And we can bring you meals regularly too. No one should live on hospital cafeteria food." "That's very kind, but you have Emma to care for and your own household to manage," I protested mildly. Rebecca's expression turned determined. "We'll manage. Michael has already spoken to his boss about working remotely next week so he can help more with Emma. And we want to do this, Joan. You've done so much for us. It's our turn to support you." The simple declaration, "It's our turn," represented such a profound evolution in our relationship that I felt momentarily speechless. This wasn't the reluctant acceptance of obligation or the performative gratitude I might have expected from Rebecca earlier in our relationship. It was a genuine desire to reciprocate care, to engage in the mutual support that defines true family bonds. Over the following 2 weeks, as Susan slowly stabilized and began the long process of recovery, Michael and Rebecca maintained their steadfast support. They established a rotation with some of my other friends to ensure I had fresh clothes, home-cooked meals, and regular breaks from the hospital. Sometimes Rebecca would come alone, bringing updates about Emma and photos of her latest developmental milestones. Other times, Michael would arrive with Emma herself, bringing a burst of baby joy to the sterile hospital environment. Most surprisingly, they coordinated with Catherine Wilson to host a small gathering at their home for Susan's medical team, doctors and nurses who had worked with both Susan and me over the years. Catherine, perhaps recognizing an opportunity to deploy her social planning skills in service of a genuine need, arranged a tasteful luncheon that gave these dedicated professionals a chance to connect with each other and with me outside the hospital setting. Mom was happy to help, Rebecca explained when I expressed surprise at this collaboration. I think she's beginning to understand that there are different but equally valuable ways to support family. Her social connections and event planning expertise have their place, just as your practical care and medical knowledge have theirs. This mature perspective, acknowledging the contributions of both grandmothers without elevating one above the other, demonstrated Rebecca's growing wisdom as she navigated the complex family dynamics surrounding Emma. When Susan was finally stable enough to be transferred to a rehabilitation facility, I was able to return home for more than a brief shower and change of clothes. I found my house immaculate, my refrigerator stocked with prepared meals, and fresh flowers on the kitchen table, tangible expressions of care that went far beyond obligation. "We wanted you to come home to something nice," Michael explained, when I called to thank them. "After all those nights in a hospital chair, you deserve some comfort." His thoughtfulness reminded me of the young boy who had once made me breakfast in bed on Mother's Day. Burnt toast and lukewarm tea presented with such pride and love. That essential caring nature had always been there, simply obscured for a time by the Wilson influence and his own ambitions. The following Sunday, Rebecca called to invite me to dinner, mentioning casually that Catherine and Edward would also be attending. Such combined gatherings had been rare before, typically reserved for major holidays or Emma's milestones. They were now initiating a regular family dinner including both sets of grandparents signaled another step in their journey toward creating a balanced family culture. When I arrived, I found Catherine already there, supervising Emma in her high chair while Rebecca finished preparing the meal. To my surprise, Catherine greeted me with genuine warmth. "Joan, how is Susan doing?" Rebecca mentioned she's been moved to Lakeview Rehabilitation Center. Her sincere interest in my friend's condition, not just polite inquiry but actual engagement with the details, suggested that perhaps Catherine, too, was evolving in her understanding of what constituted meaningful family connection. "She's making progress," I replied, accepting the glass of wine Edward offered. "The physicians are cautiously optimistic about her recovery, though it will be a long road. If there's anything we can do to help, please let us know," Edward said, his usual brisk manner softened by genuine concern. "I serve on the board at Lakeview, and I'd be happy to ensure Susan receives the best possible care." In the past, I might have bristled at this offer, seeing it as the typical Wilson approach, leveraging connections rather than providing practical support. But I'd come to recognize that we all contribute in different ways, using the resources and skills available to us. Edward's connections might indeed benefit Susan, just as my medical knowledge had benefited Emma. "Thank you, Edward," I said sincerely. "I appreciate that offer." As we gathered around the dinner table, Michael and Rebecca, Catherine and Edward, Emma in her high chair, and me, I was struck by the remarkable journey we had traveled as a family. From my exclusion from the hospital to this moment of shared meal, and genuine connection, the path had been neither straight nor easy. There had been hurt feelings, difficult conversations, and necessary boundaries established. But throughout it all, Emma had remained at the center, the bright, beautiful reason for us to find a way forward together. Her smile as she banged enthusiastically on her high chair tray, her delighted laughter when Michael pretended to eat her mashed sweet potatoes, her curious gaze moving between all the adults who loved her. These simple joys provided the foundation for our evolving family bonds. "I'd like to propose a toast," Michael said, raising his glass. "To family, not just the one we're born into, but the one we create through love, respect, and showing up when it matters." As we clinked glasses, around the table I caught Rebecca's eye. Her smile held a depth of understanding that transcended words, an acknowledgement of how far we had come and the journey still ahead. Later, as I helped clear the dinner dishes, Catherine joined me at the sink, taking up a dish towel to dry what I had washed. This simple act of shared domestic labor, so unlike her usual carefully manicured distance from household tasks, seemed emblematic of the subtle shifts occurring in all our relationships. "You know," she said quietly, carefully polishing a wine glass, "I've been doing some reflecting lately. About family, about what makes a good grandmother." She glanced toward the living room where Rebecca was nursing Emma, while Michael and Edward discussed a recent sporting event. "Watching you with Emma these past months has been educational." The admission clearly cost her some pride, and I appreciated the effort it represented. "We all have different gifts to offer her," I replied diplomatically. "Yes, but some gifts are more immediately valuable than others," Catherine acknowledged with unexpected candor. "Your practical knowledge, your calm during crises, your willingness to help without taking over. These are qualities I've had to acknowledge I don't naturally possess." Her self-awareness surprised me. "You bring other important elements to Emma's life," I pointed out. "Culture, social confidence, a sense of possibility and ambition. These aren't small contributions." Catherine nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps, but I'm learning that timing matters, knowing when those gifts are needed and when they're not." She dried another plate before adding, "When Emma was ill, all my social connections and lifestyle advantages meant nothing. What she needed was exactly what you could provide." This acknowledgement that different circumstances called for different grandmotherly strengths represented significant growth in Catherine's perspective. Not an abandonment of her own values and contributions, but a more nuanced understanding of their place in Emma's life. "I think that's true for all of us," I offered. "Learning when to step forward and when to step back. It's a balance I'm still figuring out myself." Catherine's smile held a hint of her usual confidence, but tempered now with genuine reflection. "Well, between the two of us, perhaps we can provide Emma with a complete set of grandmotherly virtues. Your practical wisdom and my social acumen." "A formidable combination," I agreed, with a smile of my own. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the remarkable journey from hospital exclusion to family inclusion. The painful moment when I'd been banned from witnessing Emma's birth had ultimately catalyzed a necessary reckoning. For me, in learning to assert my rightful place rather than accepting erasure. For Michael, in recognizing the true value of family beyond status and connections. For Rebecca, in finding her voice and establishing healthy boundaries with both her mother and mother-in-law. Even for Catherine, that difficult episode had eventually led to growth, a grudging but genuine acknowledgement that her way wasn't the only legitimate approach to family and grandmothering. We had all been transformed by the experience, emerging with a more balanced, honest, and ultimately healthier family dynamic. I thought of Emma, growing and thriving at the center of this evolving family constellation. She would benefit from all of us, from Catherine's social confidence and Edward's worldly knowledge, from Michael's compassion and Rebecca's emerging strength, from my practical care and medical experience. Not a competition between grandparents or parenting philosophies, but a rich tapestry of different strengths and perspectives, all offered with love. As I pulled into my driveway, my phone chimed with a message from Rebecca. Emma just rolled over for the first time. Sending video. Call you tomorrow. Thank you for a lovely evening. I smiled at the simple, affectionate message, so different from the formal, guarded communications of our early relationship. That brief text represented everything we had built together: mutual respect, shared joy in Emma's development, and the easy assumption of continued connection. From hospital doors that once closed against me to family doors now standing open, the journey had been challenging, but ultimately transformative. By standing up for my place in Emma's life that difficult day, by refusing to be erased from a moment that should have included me, I had set in motion a process of healing and realignment that benefited not just me, but our entire family. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give those we love is the courage to disappoint them, to let them face the consequences of their choices. Sometimes love means making a difficult phone call to a hospital board, stepping back from the role we've always played, creating space for something new and healthier to emerge from the painful rubble of what was. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.